Welcome back. Deal making slowing down. A recent report from Merger Market shows that U.S. deal volume in the first half of the year is down from a year earlier, a sign that regulatory uncertainty is weighing on business. One concern, the Federal Trade Commission currently has only 2 commissioners. The Trump administration has not yet nominated anyone to fill the 3 vacant seats on the Federal Trade Commission. Joining us right now is Kevin Arquit, co-head of Weil, Gotshal, Global Antitrust Competitive Practice, and it is good to see you, sir. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
What do you think is behind this apparent slowdown in terms of deals, M&A?
Well, I think that the slowdown in terms of deals is because of uncertainty. Any deal maker wants to know that there's going to be consistency and predictability in what they do. So it is a factor not just of the fact that there are so few people at the Federal Trade Commission, which reviews deals, but also the fact that we don't know what the Trump administration antitrust policy is yet, because we don't have one yet. There's not a single Senate-confirmed appointee 6 months into this administration that's involved in antitrust. And with the Senate recess coming up soon, it's going to be the fall before anyone's at the Justice Department, and I think best case is the end of the year before they add to the FTC. So you've got these 2 commissioners, one's Republican, one Democrat, and certainly they do their best to make it appear that they can reconcile their differences, but they're very different philosophically, and each has a veto power over the other, because in order to get an enforcement action undertaken, you have to have a majority vote. So if either one says no, it doesn't happen. If, on the other hand, the more interventionist commissioner doesn't like some consent agreement, which is a way to settle merger differences, that person either doesn't have to vote on it and votes no, and it doesn't happen. So each one has the ability to paralyze the agency, which, of course,
these vacancies are paralyzing things.
Well, I think these 2 commissioners are working very hard for that not to happen, but for a president who ran on a campaign of what he thought was draining the swamp and getting his own people involved to miss what's going to be close to a year, a quarter of his term, without even putting people in an agency to get a majority is very unusual and unexplained. Very few presidents have this opportunity. These are 7-year terms, and the fact that there are 3 available when he comes on is historic, and he has not taken advantage of it.
Wow. What's the holdup then? Do you have any guidance from Washington, and what do you say to the Trump administration?
Well, at the Justice Department, they have named a very qualified individual for the job, and he's passed what's called the committee approval. These things have to go and get Senate approval, but it has not come before the full Senate yet. So that's being held up. We don't know if that'll be before the recess. I don't know at the Federal Trade Commission, but there may be one distinction. The Justice Department is part of the executive branch, so the president does have the right to give input and to make suggestions as to how that person should enforce the laws. The Federal Trade Commission is an independent agency, and so once he makes appointments to that, it is improper for him to try to affect their policy. And it may be he wants to make sure that he's getting people that are consistent with his philosophy before he names those names.
I have a competitive question for you. Now,
Sure.
One of the things we're seeing with Google and Amazon is it's disrupting everybody. But there are already people saying they're too big, they're too monopolistic. Google just got a fine of $2.7 billion levied against it. What's the future look like for those companies?
Well, what happens is that as companies get bigger, they are more likely to become on the regulator's enforcement screen. So things that they did without any problem while they were growing are fine, but then when they get big enough, it scares some people. But big does not equal bad. We do not make it illegal simply because a company is big. But as a company gets large, they do get on the regulator's radar screen.
They become a target.
And they have to do things differently. For example, a lot of companies like to bundle products. They like to give selective discounts. They like to engage in exclusive dealing. If you're a small company, you can do that every day of the week. But if you're a big company and you do that, and it disadvantages a competitor, you can then be accused of monopolization. And there's I think a groundswell, and you're starting to read more negative articles about Amazon as they stretch into these different areas. The fact they integrate into those areas is not a problem. It's the actions they take that foreclose, say, other online distribution networks or the peripheral products that's there. And just one other point on that, because people sometimes claim that, well, the European Union, the European Commission discriminates against U.S. companies. And it's an interesting argument, but the fact of the matter is that throughout time, there's been many EU investigations and fines of American companies. And I think the real thing to think about is to turn it around and say, well, what's with the shoe on the other foot? What do the U.S. agencies do all the time? Half of our cartel cases are brought against foreign companies. We put foreign individuals in jail. We recently actually extradited a guy that was traveling through 2 countries because of a border watch to bring him over here and put him in jail. The European Commission has done nothing like that. So before we get too arrogant and too complaining about how the European Commission is looking at us, we ought to take a look at how we deal with foreign companies.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I remember in the 90s, Microsoft was way too big, right? And they kept getting hit with fine after fine, and now Amazon is the Microsoft of
Sure, it's
today.
Microsoft, Intel, Google, Amazon. You go right through.
Exactly.
Every time someone gets big, that's what happens.
Real quick before you go, AT&T, Time Warner, that's on the docket. Does that deal go through, you think?
Yeah, I think it goes through because it's there's very little competitive overlap, and that's what, at the end of the day, the government regulators are looking for.
Kevin, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for weighing in this morning.
Thank you.
Kevin Arquit joining us there.